Okay, we will be starting the last session in today's program. We have all the speakers on stage for a reflection session. So I hand over to Inaniwa-san and Ito-san to be the moderators. Okay, thank you. So it's been a long day, but we're in the final 1 hour. Until the end of the program. So we're going to go into the reflection program, reflecting back on the day so far. So myself and Inaniwa-san will be the moderators for the session. So without delay, we've heard all of the presentations and also had the dialogue talk where all the attendees have really had discussions and the speakers have all listened in to that discussion. So Hibino-san, President Hibino, can you share with us what you heard? Yes, this goes back to what was said earlier. The global population is now 8 billion. And you know, I think until quite recently we were saying 7 billion. Now it's 8 billion. So worldwide, there are a lot of global challenges, planet-wide challenges. And even elementary school children know about these issues nowadays. And they're thinking about how long is this going to continue? What's going to happen in future? And we talk of how young people should have dreams. And when you're young, you should take on a lot of different challenges. But the children nowadays are like, yeah, you say so. However, looking at the current situation, and you can see that the networks have also evolved. So the information transmission speed is much faster now. We're getting artificial intelligence that are communicating information much faster than humans. So you start thinking, what is it to be human? What's going to happen to us in future? So you get lots of information that make you concerned. Lots of information that stop you from trying to turn your eyes to the future. We're seeing a lot of these social problems surface. And today's theme of our forum is art, health, and well-being at the museum, with museums. I really believe that in such times, it is the role of museum to take care of art, health, and well-being. So listening to all of the case studies from the UK and hearing all what was said during the dialogue talk, their dreams. As I said before, I was able to also dream, and hearing the discussion today, I felt like it could happen. So if all 8 billion of humankind really had this dream that you really want to achieve, then I'm sure the world will start moving in that direction. So I believe it has been a really fruitful and meaningful session for each and every one of us, and I feel inspired to try hard from tomorrow. Karaoka-san, how about you? So taking a planet-wide perspective or a global perspective, what exactly are museums? Actually, last year in summer, the ICOM World Assembly actually updated the definition of museum. And ICOM Japan website will tell you that the past definition of collecting artwork and then researching and then displaying them now has expanded into other areas as well to include diversity and inclusiveness and sustainability. Museums now have to think about all of these things. We also need to commit to community. So that's a new definition that's been added through ICOM. So museums around the world are now going to be expanding their activities to include those sustainability and inclusiveness issues. And so today's talk really touched upon those topics. What I felt was really interesting listening to today's talk was Ruth and Carol project bore fruit after working on it for more than 10 years. And I think that was a big takeaway from me. Because when you put together an exhibition at the museum, when you're involved in a biennale or a triennale, you usually only take 2 years or 1.5 years for preparation. And now you have to show achievements in that short period of time. And even though we say we want the artists and community to commit to the cause, you're going to be inviting participants from overseas and then doing research and then working with the people in the community. You just get a few rounds of discussions. And you only have so much time to build relationships. I felt there was a limit to what we could do in such a short time. But the example with Ms. Susan Lacey involved weekly Zoom meetings, really building relationships and really building trust, which got to where you are now. And so hearing that multiple projects took more than 10 years to bear fruit was a big thing for me. I'm sure that many museums work with single-year budgets, but in parallel with talking about what you're going to do with this year's budget, you also need to talk about what you want to achieve 10 years in future. You need to think of that long-term vision, and I think today provided a venue for us to think about that. So social prescription, cultural prescription, and medical are like medical prescriptions. You may not get immediate results like taking a pill for a cultural or social prescription, but it requires a lot of time and effort. And so as a museum, we really need to commit to the community. And I think we need to stretch the time spans that we have in mind and then think more about the future so that it can lead to dreams. And so that the dreams will no longer be just dreams but become reality in future. Okay, thank you. So today was a very important day, and UK culture, commonly, the case studies we heard today will give us more fruit. Matthew-san, what was your take? How will the UK's case studies help to get more dreams going in Japan?
Thank you very much. I should give a huge shout out to the fantastic simultaneous interpreting team who've done such a great job today. I think first, the first thing to acknowledge is that we've had 4 wonderful case studies from the UK, and I think this conference has been designed to shine a spotlight on innovative practice from the UK. But as Carol said, I think at the very beginning, this is an area where we're learning together. It's an area where we have the same challenges. And we could have mounted an event in the UK today and brought 4 innovative thinkers from Japan and sat for the same number of hours admiring different aspects of Japan's culture and different aspects of Japan's society. And I think the way in which Japan treasures culture and the way in which Japan treasures and respects the elderly are things that the UK looks to learn a huge amount from. So I really want to remind us of that sense that we're learning together. Something which really struck me was the different mechanisms that have been presented for public engagement. And I think in Ruth's presentation, the image we had of an interview where a whole series of women in their 60s and older were being asked to reflect on some of the challenges that they're facing. And also your deliberations about how you set up the governance for a project, and your questions about how to ensure that you had the true diversity that you needed. And I think that's obviously something to get right. But different institutions come with different histories, with different organizational cultures, and so often the change is challenging. And I think probably for Carol, working at Museums of Liverpool, established in 2011, or Mami, 20 years into the journey of Mori Art Museum, maybe it's easier to instill a particular culture into a new institution. But we also face the challenge of thinking how to faithfully change our older institutions and how to preserve their essence whilst also introducing new governance that will help to engage different audiences or draw different people into the conversation. And those are very real difficulties. But it's been an incredibly rich conversation, and just to come back to my own opening remarks, I think what's so important is to remember that these are issues that face us all. These are issues that emerge from our common humanity. And I think that one of the long shadows of COVID, and I was mentioning this to Mami, is the reinforcement of national borders. And suddenly the country in which you're born and the passport you carry once again have a strong force and a sense of a stronger defining impact on how you see the world or who you engage with. But I think in these kinds of conversations, we get to transcend those borders again and offer ourselves as a resource to one another to draw inspiration from interesting ideas, interesting models, diverse practice. And our hope is that there will be things that we all go away thinking about that we haven't thought about before. So I'm sure one of your dreams at this stage is to be breathing fresh air and not sitting on a hard chair. But we've had an incredibly rich day together, and I want to just close by thanking everybody again who's made that possible. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. And maybe we would like to ask all the panelists here from the UK. Thank you very much for your great presentation. So starting from Jane, in your session, we asked about the dialogue, and with this session, we walked around this room to listen to what each table had to say, and you gave all your presentations. And after listening to everyone's talks, maybe you have found new discoveries or maybe perhaps new dreams. So could you share all those new findings with you? Maybe we can start from Ruth. Could you start, please?
Hello. So, yeah, it's been amazing today. It's been amazing to talk to people in when we were going around the tables and listen to your discoveries and dreams. And it's also been really interesting for me to hear from Carol, Mark and Jane as well about other work in the UK. So, yeah, in terms of, there's a few things going on in my head. I'm just trying to think what's particularly... I think, just to echo what Matt said, there's a lot that we can learn from Japan. I think it's also interesting that often at these things, it's majority arts people. I know that I was interested while I was queuing for the toilet to have a conversation with somebody from the care sector, and I think sometimes it would be good to have people from the health and care sector talking about their experience of working with the arts. So I didn't say this earlier, but the director of the Robert Derbyshire practice, Vicky, is not from an art background at all, but through the integrated health network, when I first met her, she's taken that chance, she's taken that risk to think about her practice in a different way. And that's quite a big jump, because it's not easy being the director of a busy doctor's practice with 35,000 patients and a lot of care and needs in the community. And so to actually invest in the arts is a really big thing. And I think one of the things that I'm doing with Robert Derbyshire at the moment is trying to just always have these conversations where we can openly share how we're feeling and what's... so we don't default to our kind of professions without listening to the other, and just making sure it's an equal partnership is really key, because, you know, we have our art specialisms, they have their health specialisms, but also kind of marrying the two together takes time, listening, work, and so yeah, I think that's a really key thing, and that's the same for the Uncertain Futures project as well at Manchester Art Gallery. These conversations, the conversations leading up to a piece of work are so important, and Zoom actually and the pandemic really helped Uncertain Futures have those conversations. So the very fact that Suzanne could join us every week with her rigour and expertise and her way of... she's in her 70s, she's been working in this field for over 40 years, so her experience has been amazing. So I think to have that as part of the conversations, as you just can't underestimate the importance of that. So it's been really helpful listening to all of your experiences as well, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So next, Carol, please.
When you were all dreaming, I had a little dream as well. So I wrote my dream down. It's been an absolute pleasure to present to you. I just want to leave you with a few words of my reflection. I think a word that really comes to mind for us as a sector is resilience. I think this work takes commitment, all the things that we've shared, but we have to have dreams and we have to be resilient. My dream has been throughout my whole career, not just in the last 10 years of House of Memories. And as I was walking around the room, I was picking up on, thank you, my interpreter, conversations about sometimes we work in very traditional establishments. I've definitely worked in museums where my dreams perhaps weren't heard. But I never gave up on my belief to make a meaningful contribution. Sometimes you have to wait, and sometimes your survival and resilience, definitely mine, has been to reach out for professional networks beyond my establishment, to create my own advocates and supporters. I'd like to suggest to you today that you've all got new friends in the room. You've sat at tables and shared dreams and visions and discoveries. I would say foster those connections. And as a whole museum and health network, be the change makers, have the conversations. Don't lose heart if it takes time. You know, time is important. Time is often precious. Funding can be very short in supply, but never lose the vision and the dream, and work together. And in terms of what Ruth's just talked about in terms of, you know, bringing health and art together, Our aging society needs us all, and there is absolutely room for us all. So keep true to the mission and stay connected.
マークさんお願いいたします。
Thank you, and Mark, please.
Yeah, I think similar to Carol, there was a conversation about data and evidence and sort of hard evidence and metrics. And I mean, my answer was that we're in the UK, sort of we've sort of accomplished more because we've galvanized in some ways. There are sort of museum consortiums, groups that come together, but I think there's still lots of work to do. And I think just to say that, again, all of you in the room, and that was a bit of my advice actually, was about how you all come together and you're in a massive network now. If you do want evidence, it needs to come from multiple sources and multiple organizations saying very similar things. And I think that cross-organizational piece as well in terms of health, creative, cultural organizations, and I think that's the only way to sort of advocate for and create change together as a critical mass. I think the thing I'll take away from me was, and I might have heard this wrong, but there was a piece about re-evaluating the value of value, and I'll keep on picking that as well, because I think we speak a lot about values-led practice, and I think there needs to be something where myself, that was quite a nice thing for me to take away actually, just to actually look back at the values that I feel that are shared across our organisation and amongst colleagues. But is 2023 to kind of have another look at that and progress that in some way, shape or form, or not, but looking back at that is quite a nice piece for me to take away.
ありがとうございます。先ほど
Thank you very much. And earlier, Jane, we talked about discovery with you. But I haven't asked you about the dream part. So can you give us your feedback, your takeaway from the dream part discussions?
Absolutely. I was being really inspired today by thinking about how we define health and the kind of intersectionality of health. And from the discussions with people today on the tables, just thinking about how health is so, it's affected by all these different factors that are in our lives, and how museums are a part of that. They're part of a kind of knitted network of things all coming together to think about how we can be healthier and happier and how we can kind of face this challenge together. So my dream is for that intersectionality of health to continue and to be thinking about all the different, how we're connected to our communities, how we're connected to partners, how we're connected to different sectors beyond social care and health and arts, but also thinking about education and how all those different factors can kind of come together for us to feel well and to be well. So I've been really inspired today listening to you, and I was having a discussion with the table about just how it would be great for museums just to be just a normal part of our lives, so you could just pop into, or one year you could go and talk about problems or issues, or how we can just be normalized in what we do, and how inviting and great spaces they could be for that kind of, for our community and as hubs. So that's something I've really that's kind of energized me in my dreams for this work. And then the other thing is just to kind of be brave and have the conversation, do it, don't feel worried about it, just have that first conversation, because you've got this and you can do that. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you so much.
日本側からのプレゼン
So
テーション
now,
として
as a presenter from the Japan side, Fujioka-san had made a presentation. And Fujioka-san talked about the dream, your dream. And after that, I think you've listened to the dialogues at the tables. And so you might had a new discovery.
何か思うことがあればぜひお話しいただ
Any
ければ
takeaways, any thoughts on your mind now?
そうですね。まあ、
Yes, thank you.
今日イギリスの
Well, today, with our UK colleagues sharing their experience and examples and listening to the discussions at the tables, what I found is that everyone is more or less has a challenge, a serious challenge related to the age friendliness or related to the nursing care or related to poverty issues. I think that it comes from your experience at the actual practice sites. But you try to, of course, take those challenges in a positive way, but in reality, things may be quite serious. I think that's the reality people are facing. And so the term came out, resilience, a keyword resilience popped out. I think it's about thinking about how you can move one step forward. And I think today was a great opportunity for us to be together physically and together with the people on stage and also in the audience. In being in the same venue, being able to encounter people who share the same vision, I was able to receive a push for what I do. I've been working on this for 3 years, but I want to continue 10 years and even more than that. And it's important to be able to meet these people who share the same value and who can give me that positive push. And for House of Memories program, I learned that through various objects, people will live again their memories and their stories. So the memories are, they are still living it, reliving it with the objects, putting importance on the object. That was another discovery for me. Thank you. Thank you. And Inaniwa-san? Oh, thank you. Applause. Inaniwa-san, in this forum, Inaniwa-san was very influential in creating the design. And the title was Becoming Happy Well-Being with and at the Museum. So probably it's difficult to translate into English, but it will be quite straightforward title. And I think this title was very straightforward that everyone was able to understand better. And with wonderful presentations, I think the intention of this title, intention of the topic was shared with the participants as well. So I think it was a great title. And so can you look back on the history of how you've designed and developed this program and how your thoughts right now after going through the day? Yes, thank you. So well-being, this term well-being, starting from around 2015, gradually became understood by more people. And also, we are finally at a stage where we can talk about well-being at museums, the relationship with museums. And 2014, when I first visited UK and met and heard about various examples, I remember that Carol started, it was quite early time after Carol started the House of Memories. At that time, the word social prescription was not so much used in those times at 2014. But what I felt is that even at 2014, it has strong impact. Listening to what I heard in UK, so well-being, social prescription, and what Carol was doing, I thought it was a strong impact to society, and I thought that this is going to come to Japan sooner or later. And now for Japan, after the pandemic, well, pandemic was a big impact for us in terms of the experience that we all shared. And then with that as a background, people started to think about the concept of care, well-being, health. I think this concept or understanding rapidly changed as we went through the pandemic experience, and I think all of those changes became understood and more apparent here at this forum. And as I was listening to the discussions, well, after we did the planning of this forum in January, I went to the UK, listened to the talks of the members here, and then also we had an online session to hear from the relevant parties to decide what the program should look like. And for example, for Ruth's part, when I went to visit Ruth, I heard about uncertain future, and just listening to that program, my time was up. So after I came back to Japan, I had a separate online session to hear about the Platt Hall Costume Museum example. And even at that session, Ruth has explained in detail, and with the 3 people in charge. So I think we took about 3 hours to listen and understand about this program. So I learned a lot. Truly, and together with Jimmy, we learned a lot. And after we finished that session, we were very much happy. Actually, we received a lot of inspiration, and we were in a very happy mode after that 3-hour session. And today, listening to your feedback and your discussions, the inspiration I got was that I think what I really hope that this all will connect into the next action. So today, it's just a tiny part about our next actions. It's like 25 minutes, 30 minutes for what we've been able to hear from the speakers today. And actually, it's a tiny part. And now I'm thinking about how to connect it into the next step. And as I think about that, I was thinking that there was some introduction about the websites that each organization has. And Fujioka-san, Tsutobi project, there is a brochure, and I wanted to print it out and distribute it, but we were not in time, unfortunately.
But the PDF is available online in both English and Japanese. But that pamphlet, that booklet for Tsutobi, I'd like to create the opportunity to hand that out. I think that there's just so many things that I want to continue to do with everyone. There's still information we haven't been able to give to you, to share with you all, your opinions, your views, and all the people who've gathered together online today, all those post-it notes that we saw. There's so much more that we can share. I think what's born from today, what's been generated from today, in terms of everyone's thoughts and everyone's feelings, your energy, to be able to link that on to the next step. I'm really starting to think about what I can do to do that. So on that point, it's probably a good point to pick up on in terms of the energy that we're generating to get today. How do we push that forward, pay it forward? So Carol, Ruth, for example, you know, you've been out there, you've seen in the UK, and Aniwa-san, you've spoken directly in the UK, and that's part of the history of why we've got to where we are today. But if we were to talk about today, you know, I think we've achieved one goal today, one aim today, but that's not the end. What do we do from here? As we look forward, we want to help, we want to cooperate, and we want to continue to communicate so that we can deepen and spread the contents we've been talking about today. So on that point, perhaps I can invite Ruth to just say a few words if you have a comment on that, please.
Hello. Yeah, I think my microphone went that way. So sort of next steps and yeah, I think it's a mixture of starting small and very much echoing what Jane was saying about, but also remembering you don't quite know what the next, where exactly things are going. So it's important for me, with my work, is to have a methodology and a set of principles and values that you constantly reflect on, but not being too prescriptive about what the final outcome is. So the work with Uncertain Futures has been in phases, and it could have ended after a certain phase, and it's stopping and evaluating. So I think for me, my advice around next steps is to really think around those methodologies and values, principles of your work, and stop and reflect on words like well-being, care, values. We've just, at Manchester Art Gallery, my colleague Louise Thompson has just had some funding from the Bearing Foundation to really look at the word trauma-informed, which is a term that's being used a lot at the moment to be what is it to be a trauma-informed art gallery or museum? What does it mean to be a safe space? And actually, Louise is stopping to think about actually what that word means in the context, and it's a 3-year study. And so I think it's about really reflecting, but then it's almost thinking small, but at the same time being prepared to be in it for the long haul and think big without knowing exactly what the final outcome is. And I think you can see that through all this work, that there's really impressive work that comes out of it, but it's very phased. It's not, you know, Carol didn't start House of Memories knowing exactly what would happen in 10 years. So, yeah, I think that's sort of the next steps, and really building those partnerships.
So I'll offer a different lens to Ruth so that we don't all say the same thing. I think probably what we could help you with from the UK next is share with you some of the strategic knowledge that we've gathered in the background to our work. I think Sawaka said, we had 25 minutes to give you a whirlwind tour. So I think there are things we can continue to contribute. In your packs, you've got some really informative documentation. I think there's more that we've produced since then. So I would, let's between us feed your minds a little bit. And so you mentioned social prescribing. There is a movement now in the UK that's government funded, that is the National Association of Social Prescribing, and it's leading the strategy for the UK. So I would put you in touch with them so you can find out. And I think we can help with some of that strategic knowledge. And for any of your colleagues, any resources that we have that are online, I would be open to having them translated into Japanese, particularly the reflective work. So I have a 10-year academic review of House of Memories that was the University of Liverpool published for me last year. I would be open to having that translated so that colleagues can continue to read and open their minds and explore. Because if everybody leaves today inspired, we want to keep feeding that. So if we can, we've all got stuff. Sorry, that's not very academic, but we've all got stuff that we can pass on to you. So I would be really open for doing that.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have spoken about partnerships and how important they are in long-term projects. I think what we could share is a lot of the challenges of partnerships, because we haven't spoken a lot about the challenges of a lot of this work, and there are many. So I think that's something we could do, and I think there's lots of nuance around challenges, and there's lots of interpersonal connections and all sorts of differences. And I think both economic, someone also mentioned governance, and I've mentioned advocacy. So I think there's lots of sort of major challenges that will enable some positive potential to emerge if you know much more about that.
I mean, I second what all of you have said, but I think there's a new document which might be useful to look at, which is the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance. They've just created a new toolkit, which you can use and apply to any kind of culture and health and wellbeing project you're doing. It's got really good documents for commissioners, for art organizations, for art practitioners, and it's got a really interesting kind of methodology and thing you can work through. It's really rich and detailed, but it's also got kind of a top line, and it's useful just to reflect on where you're at, but also if you're starting new, it's a good place to think about how these projects and the different kind of ingredients that go into these projects. So that I think would be great to get that translated or to share that, and I'm happy to share that with everyone.
Thank you very much. President Hibino and also Kataoka-san, I'd also like to come to you both as well. So between NCAR and Tokyo University of the Arts, and you have this communication base as well, talking about internationally information being gathered and disseminated. When you talk about becoming an international base, I guess that's something that, we have in mind. And when we think about that and listen to everything that's been said, how we push this forward, I think this does tie into the dream as well. But what do you think? Yes, I think we've had some really great, reassuring examples, these precedents that we can think about, thinking about social prescription, that there's an association now that is a national strategic association. That's great to hear. I think that could be a really great reference for Japan moving forward. I think within today's presentations, we heard about Manchester. We saw that map of Manchester, you remember, and we were seeing that there were these differences, inequalities, areas with poverty, for example. I think Ruth covered that in her presentation. So what's the situation in Japan? There are differences to what we see here in Japan in terms of, do we accept as many immigrants, not as the UK, or if you think about differences in consciousness or awareness levels between citizens of Japan versus
the UK. In Japan, we think about the Meiji Ishin revival. We talk about the Second World War. We have these historical milestones that we kind of put in place. And if you think about Tokyo, and you've got the National Museum, 150 years of anniversary, the Tokyo University of Arts, it's about 140 years since we were established. And I think recently JR, Japan Rail, reached its 150th anniversary. So I think this flowering and blossoming of civilization in Japan, and with that, we've started to suddenly see this spread of museums and galleries here in Japan. And I think that's how arts have been incorporated into Japan. So Tokyo University of the Arts, obviously that's where I'm at, but arts, and then the Japanese word geijutsu, are they really equal words? Do they mean the same things? The word jutsu in terms of skills and crafts? Maybe museums, we were talking about, the hard threshold of getting into a big museum. But if you think about in Japan, when you think about geijutsu, art, in day-to-day lives, I feel like maybe there's actually a greater distance between an ordinary Japanese person's life and a museum. So today we have people in the room who are really interested in the arts. But if we look out at the Japanese population and we think about what percentage of the Japanese population would get what we're talking about today, immediately get what we're talking about, I actually think that that's a pretty challenging thing to ask for the general population. And for example, if we think about the authorities, corporations, partnering with them, I think there are going to be challenges associated with that.
But that said, really hearing the advanced case studies and taking reference from that and charging ahead with our own initiatives is important. And when you look at the various areas across the world, we've got Singapore, which is also a leading example from Asia. There are lots of different regions who have social and cultural prescription activities going on. And so taking on the challenge worldwide and really analyzing that data, making that into big data would help. And so we would hope that if we can start these activities in Japan, to be part of that big picture, that would be also great. So for me, getting people here in person to have a discussion and also having like 1,400 people signing up and then actually 500 people joining online is great. And the network that we have formed today will be the starting point of future activities. At the research center, we are working through our international communications group, working on exchanges between curators and artists. We are going to be putting more effort into that. So, in order to become an international hub or a site, we need to be connected to real people. If we're not connected to real people, nothing's going to happen. And that's what I was reminded of today. So, drawing on that connection with real people, the social prescription or the cultural prescription that were keywords for today's forum. These are things that we want to work on to really spread in Japanese society. And I asked Inaniwa-san about this. Are there any hospitals that give social prescriptions? Are there such hospitals in Japan? I heard that there are several hospitals in Japan who do social prescriptions. So we need to communicate that concept and then develop people who are capable of executing that concept. We need to connect the healthcare world with the art world. Japan has a certain history of having operated museums. In the 1970s and 80s, there's a big boom and a big increase in the number of museums. We have now a lot of museums throughout the country, but do they have adequate budget? That's questionable. So sometimes it's now getting difficult to run a museum. So the value of art and value of history need to be communicated through our organizations. By adding the social value factor to that communication, the meaning of existence of museums will become enhanced in society. So we want to communicate that internally as well, so that we might be able to open up a new era for museums. So today's talk gave me hope for that. But of course, in order to make that happen, we need to take tangible, real actions. And President Hibino talked about how we need to talk about our dreams in order to realize them. If the dream sounds unreachable, why not just draw a vision anyway? Draw that vision anyway. And then you can take 10 years or 20 years to get nearer to that vision. And if we can all work together to get closer to that vision, then a dream will no longer become a dream, it will become reality. Thank you. That was a very encouraging remark. So that inspires us at the working level to also try hard. So the program that we will be working on together for the next 10 years, Inaniwa-san, myself, Fujioka-san, people like us in Japan really need to drive what we've discussed today forward. So, Inaniwa-san, any comments? Well, in today's talk, we heard about how social prescription, when you're working on social prescription and cultural prescription, you have, on one hand, healthcare professionals, and then you have link workers who also play a very important role. And then you have the people on the receiving end. So if the link workers can regularly work with the people who receive those social prescriptions, if they could consult together and get more opportunities to connect them to the rest of society, that would be great. So how do we get link workers to understand that art can contribute to health and well-being is key. So we really need to spread that understanding of how art and art can contribute to well-being. That's important. And so how can museums specifically show that we are helping to enhance well-being? Museums do need to create that opportunity to show link workers how this works. And I agree that that kind of opportunity is necessary. So the people who have been, because link workers are the people who connect the social prescribers with the people receiving the prescriptions. There are people who want to care for these people. And I think working with them is also very important. Now, based on my past experience, in each regional area, there are these social councils. And when you talk to them, they would say, oh, we actually did not consider that in the past, but we probably might be able to do that in the future. For example, the Orange Cafe example. Even if you call out to people on the spot, they might not be willing to participate. But once you enter in the keyword art or museum, now some people may become more motivated to join. So that could expand some of the options available for a wider audience. So having more cards to lay on the table is important, and art could function to provide that extra option. And so but we first really need to get connected with the link workers, the people in between. Thank you. Same question to Fujioka-san. We end with you for this turn. Okay.
はい、皆さんのお話も聞きながらですけれ
So
ども、
listening to what everyone has been
私
saying,
は本当に美術館の学芸員になってます。
I'm really a third-year curator at the museum, working in the real front lines, thinking of how to work on creative programs.
手応えが出てきた。
And little by little, I'm starting to
やっ
see
ぱり
fruit of my
現場
efforts.
で一生懸命つながりを作って、
Even if we in the front lines work really hard to create connections with healthcare professionals and people in the region and working together with the Tobiras, just doing that at a working level does not help. We need to really disseminate that value to the outside world as well. And I have a request to stakeholders.
例えば行政とか、そういう政策を決
If
定している
the
人に届いて
policy makers and the administrative personnel get hold of what we are doing, and if they could work as agilely as in the UK, so that we could work on creative agility. If the policymakers could also work on building infrastructure to enable that, that would be great. We need to do research. We need to design the system. We also need to work on the nuts and bolts.
だと思いますし、
I do believe that this kind of project is worthwhile doing, and this is something that we should be putting effort into.
どんどん
Thank you.
イギリ
Matthew
スと
San.
この日本との
So
関
we're
係性という
seeing
ものが育まれていくという
an
ことに
increasing build up a relationship between Japan and UK. So after listening to all of the people on stage, so could you share some thoughts on what crossed your mind?
Yeah, I think when I first arrived in Japan, which was towards the end of 2019, one of the big conversations going on was about the changing demographics and aging, and soon after that we saw the arrival of COVID, and that became an all-encompassing, all-consuming conversation. From the British Council's perspective, what's so difficult for us is to find the areas where we feel there's scope for the countries to work more closely together. What I mean by difficult is there's always limited time and there's always limited resource and there's no end of things that we could be doing. But the strategic challenge is to hone in on the things where we feel there's maybe greatest potential to do more. And this area that we've been exploring today around arts and health and arts and well-being, we see that as one of the top priorities for both countries. We see that as an area where we've got an enormous amount to learn from one another. And I think Mami's point about vision, it turns out it was not long enough to conclude the conversation. But it is a big step forward in casting our eyes towards the kind of future that we want to see and the kind of institutions that we want to forge, and the ways in which we can get that, whether that's through a focus on interdisciplinarity or an attempt to replicate innovative practice that's been identified. But I think I leave overwhelmingly encouraged that there's such a mass of people here who are concerned to get this right. And just a final comment. Looking back, last weekend we had the Science and Technology and Society Forum in Kyoto. And in that meeting of university leaders and leading scientists and academics, this issue of aging was one of the main conversations, and there's lots of practical advice about getting sugar out of your diet and swimming rather than running, but also many of the themes that have come up today about how we support families, how we support people experiencing isolation, how we promote social inclusion, how we ensure that a country's infrastructure and its institutions are offering real care and support. And I think Mark's question is a great one to take away about where where the care is ultimately coming from, whether it is right for an institution to be the source of care or a facilitator or a platform or a space. But I feel encouraged that we've supported the network, and ultimately that network is one of the most powerful assets in taking these conversations forward.
マッシュさんありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Matthew. So that we really want to listen to all the comments, but our time is running out. So Ms. Inaniwa, maybe can you give some final words to us? Please, thank you very much. So this could be a great kick-off opportunity for everyone. We can go on to the next phase and we can co-create our future each other. So I look forward to meeting you again and let's join together. Okay, thank you very much. That ends this reflection session. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Okay, and thank you very much for the panelists on stage. So especially today, we have all the distinguished from UK. And you had a 14 hours long flight and you just arrived yesterday. So thank you very much for all the efforts. And the audience here with us, thank you very much for your participation. And so in the dialogue session, we had online members writing in Miro, and we had a great takeaway from that as well. So that ends today's forum. So with this forum as a starting point, we really would like to enhance our activities together to become a great museum for everyone.